The first time I realized my new neighbor was genuinely insane. She was standing in my driveway at 7:30 in the morning, holding a ruler like she was about to arrest my grass. I'm serious. A full-grown woman in white capri pants, oversized sunglasses, and one of those little HOA clipboards, measuring dead winter grass in 30-degree weather while I stood there half awake, holding a cup of gas station coffee. And somehow, that little moment ended with my house burning to the ground 6 months later. Funny how life works like that sometimes. My name's Nolan Mercer, I'm 53 years old, and for most of my adult life I've been two different people, depending on the day of the week. 3 days a week I serve as a municipal judge outside Salt Lake City, mostly traffic cases, small claims, city ordinance nonsense, people yelling about fences and barking dogs and parking tickets. The other days, I restore old homes. Not because it makes money. Honestly, it barely does anymore. But because after my wife Evelyn died, I needed something to keep my hands busy before my mind ate itself alive. Cancer does something ugly to a house after a while. Not physically, emotionally. Every room starts feeling like a countdown clock. Every silence gets loud. Evelyn used to joke that I could fix anything except my own inability to sit still. Maybe she was right. About a year after she passed, I found this old 1924 Craftsman sitting in a neighborhood called Juniper Ridge. Beautiful bones, huge front porch, original oak trim, stained glass windows somebody somehow hadn't destroyed yet. The place smelled like cedar and dust and old history. The second I walked inside, I could hear Evelyn's voice in my head talking about what color she'd paint the kitchen cabinets. That was it for me. I bought the place the next morning. My plan was simple. Restore the home exactly the way she would have wanted, then turn it into temporary housing for families going through cancer treatment. Somewhere people could breathe for a minute without drowning in bills or hospital smells or fear. That was the dream. Then I met Vanessa Holloway. Lord, even saying her name now raises my blood pressure a little. Vanessa was president of the Juniper Ridge HOA, and apparently she treated that title like she'd been elected queen of a tiny, miserable kingdom nobody else realized existed. She introduced herself by handing me a violation notice before she even said hello. Your lawn exceeds community height guidelines, she told me. I remember staring at her, then staring at the frozen brown grass covered in frost. Ma'am, I said, the lawn is legally deceased right now. She didn't laugh, didn't even blink, just tapped her clipboard and said, rules preserve property values. That sentence right there told me everything I needed to know about her. Over the next few weeks, the violations kept coming. Dumpster visible from the street. Paint samples not HOA approved. Work truck parked overnight. Mailbox black not matte black. I wish I was exaggerating. Meanwhile, every other house on the block had construction trailers and basketball hoops and cracked fences, and somehow none of them got letters. Just me. One afternoon, she walked into my property uninvited while I was sanding hardwood floors and said, people move here to avoid neighborhoods that look transitional. The way she paused before that last word made my stomach turn. I'd spent enough years in courtrooms to recognize coded language when I heard it. That wasn't about renovations. That was about control. And underneath the control, fear. See, people like Vanessa always think they're protecting something, even when they're poisoning it. The first real crack happened when county inspectors suddenly showed up claiming someone reported dangerous, unlicensed electrical work. Problem was, all my permits were perfectly legal. The inspector, older guy named Ray, actually looked embarrassed. He flipped through his paperwork and quietly muttered, "Third complaint this month from the same resident." That's when my judge brain switched on. Patterns matter. Patterns tell stories people don't realize they're telling. So that night, I poured myself a bourbon, sat at my kitchen table surrounded by HOA records, and started digging. And what I found sitting inside those financial statements, that's when this whole thing stopped being about petty neighborhood drama and started becoming something a whole lot darker. The weird thing about financial corruption is it almost never starts with some giant movie-style scheme. It starts small, little shortcuts people convince themselves they deserve. A reimbursement here, a favor there, maybe a contract handed to a cousin because, well, they needed the work. Then one day you wake up and realize somebody's been stealing from an entire neighborhood for 3 straight years while pretending to protect it. That was Vanessa. I sat at my kitchen table until almost 2 in the morning going through HOA records line by line, and the deeper I dug, the uglier it got. The HOA was paying nearly $9,000 a month to a property management company for a neighborhood with 41 homes. That alone was insane. Then I checked the LLC registration. The company belonged to Vanessa's sister. I actually leaned back in my chair and laughed when I saw it, because criminals are rarely creative, they're just arrogant. And arrogant people always leave fingerprints. I started cross-checking invoices against work orders. Landscaping bills for work nobody remembered happening. Emergency drainage repairs during weeks with no rainstorms. Snow removal charges in months where Utah barely saw flurries. It was sloppy, the kind of sloppy people become when nobody's challenged them in years. But what really caught my attention was the insurance policy, or more specifically, the lack of one. The HOA's liability coverage had expired almost 5 months earlier. Vanessa either forgot to renew it or intentionally ignored it to cover cash flow problems, and either way it meant every board member was personally exposed if somebody filed suit. That was the moment I realized why she'd been targeting me so aggressively. She wasn't protecting property values. She was protecting a collapsing scam. So I stopped reacting emotionally and started moving carefully. Courtroom rules. Never show your hand too early. I anonymously mailed copies of the insurance lapse to 3 homeowners who'd been denied repair requests over the past year. One was a retired Army mechanic named Walter Briggs. Big guy, 70s, hearing aid, permanent coffee breath. The other was a widow named Diane who'd been fighting the HOA for months over mold damage they refused to cover. Within 48 hours, Juniper Ridge turned into absolute chaos. The next HOA meeting looked less like a neighborhood gathering and more like a hostage negotiation. Vanessa walked in wearing this cream-colored blazer like she was headed to a Senate hearing, all polished smiles and fake warmth, until Walter stood up holding the expired insurance documents. I'll never forget the look on her face. You know that split second when somebody realizes the room no longer belongs to them? It was that. Why? Walter asked. Did you let our liability insurance lapse while charging us increased dues? Vanessa smiled the way snakes probably smile before they bite. There's been some administrative confusion. Administrative confusion? Diane snapped. You charged me $400 because my bird feeder violated aesthetic guidelines. People started talking over each other after that. Voices climbing. Chair scraping. Somebody yelled about missing reserve funds. Another guy demanded independent audits. Vanessa kept trying to regain control, but every answer just made things worse. Then she looked directly at me in the back row, and I swear you could physically feel the temperature in the room drop. Certain individuals, she said carefully, have been spreading misinformation because they're upset they aren't above community rules. There it was. Not subtle at all anymore. And honestly, part of me admired the commitment. Most bullies fold when challenged. Vanessa escalated. 3 days later, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. Judges should stay in courtrooms before somebody gets hurt. No signature. But the paper smelled heavily of vanilla perfume and cigarette smoke, which happened to follow Vanessa around like an angry cloud every time she entered a room. That should have been the point where I called the police. Probably would have been the smart thing. But grief changes your relationship with fear. After watching your wife slowly die over 32 months, HOA threats start feeling pretty small. Evelyn used to tell me something during chemo treatments whenever things got bad. Don't panic just because ugly people get loud. I held on to that sentence harder than I probably should have. About 2 weeks later, things crossed another line. I came home from court one evening and found my workshop trashed. Not robbed, targeted. Extension cords sliced clean through. Paint stripper dumped across newly restored flooring. Antique cabinet doors cracked deliberately right down the middle. Whoever did it wanted me angry, wanted me rattled. Deputy Larson took the report, walked through the damage, then quietly asked if I had any enemies. I laughed so hard, she actually looked uncomfortable. You got 3 hours? I asked. She gave me this sympathetic look and said something that stuck with me. People who crave control usually get dangerous when they start losing it. She was right, because around that same time, the independent audit petition officially passed. 7 homeowners signed on. Enough to legally force a financial review under state HOA law. Vanessa absolutely lost her mind after that. Emergency board meetings. Threatening letters. Rumors spreading through the neighborhood that I was abusing judicial authority to intimidate residents. At one point, somebody even filed an ethics complaint against me with the state commission claiming I'd weaponized my position as a judge. Completely baseless, but still exhausting. And underneath all that noise was this constant low hum of tension that never really went away. Every time I drove into Juniper Ridge, I could feel eyes watching from behind curtains. The neighborhood started splitting into sides. Some people wanted accountability. Others just wanted the drama to disappear no matter who was right. Communities do that under pressure. They fracture. Then came the fire. April 17th, 2:41 in the morning. My phone rang while I was asleep on the couch at my condo downtown. Walter's voice came through shaking so hard I barely recognized him. "Nolan, your house." That's all he said. Just those 2 words. I drove like an idiot. Blew through red lights. Hit 90 on side roads. By the time I reached Juniper Ridge, the entire back half of the house was engulfed. Flames pouring through the roof beams like the place had been dipped in gasoline. Firefighters already knew they weren't saving it. They were just trying to keep the neighboring homes from catching. I remember standing barefoot in the street because I'd forgotten shoes in the panic, staring at smoke rolling into the sky while ash landed on my sweatshirt like dirty snowflakes. And across the street, sitting inside a white Mercedes SUV with the engine running, was Vanessa Holloway. She wasn't crying, wasn't shocked, wasn't even pretending to help, just sitting there watching my house burn like somebody attending theater. The fire marshal pulled me aside around 4:30 in the morning. Point of origin was the basement window, he said quietly. Accelerant involved. My stomach dropped. Arson. Deliberate. Suddenly, every weird little incident over the past few months connected together like railroad tracks. Walter leaned close beside me and muttered, "I saw her drive by twice yesterday, real slow. But suspicion isn't evidence. And people like Vanessa survive because they understand that difference." Detective Ben Ortega took my statement later that week, listened carefully, nodded in all the right places, then basically admitted what I already knew. Without hard proof, the case would stall. Circumstantial evidence doesn't survive criminal court, especially not against somebody rich enough to lawyer up. So officially, nothing happened. No arrest, no charges, no justice, which is exactly why I decided to stop playing defense. Because while everybody else saw a burned-down house, I saw something else. I saw a narcissist who thought she'd won. And the thing about narcissists is eventually they always come back to admire the damage. 3 days after the fire, I installed 4 hidden cameras around the property. Small ones, motion-activated, cellular backup, good enough resolution to catch a mosquito picking its nose from 30 feet away. I didn't tell anybody except Walter, and even he thought I was being paranoid. Maybe I was. But after 15 years on the bench, I'd learned something most people never understand about human behavior. Guilt makes people restless. Innocent people avoid crime scenes. Guilty people revisit them in their heads until eventually they revisit them in person. Sure enough, 5 days later my phone buzzed while I was eating lunch downtown. Motion detected. Camera 3. I opened the app and there she was. Vanessa, walking through the burned remains of my house wearing sunglasses and leather gloves like she was starring in her own true crime documentary. She moved slowly through the debris, kicking through ash piles, looking around nervously before bending down and slipping something into her purse. Copper piping from the basement. Evidence. I watched the clip 3 times sitting there in a sandwich shop while turkey and mustard suddenly tasted like absolutely nothing. That should have been enough to arrest her right there for trespassing and tampering. But I didn't send the footage immediately. I waited, because something in my gut told me Vanessa wasn't done spiraling yet. And when desperate people think they're cornered, that's usually when they finally tell the truth. 2 weeks later, the audit results dropped like a bomb into Juniper Ridge. Missing reserve funds, fraudulent invoices, forged signatures, nearly $160,000 gone over 3 years. The report practically read like an organized crime worksheet written by somebody who'd failed basic accounting twice. By that evening, the neighborhood Facebook page looked like a digital riot. People demanding arrests, board members resigning publicly, homeowners threatening lawsuits. Vanessa responded exactly how guilty people always respond, by attacking harder. She mailed letters accusing me of orchestrating a personal vendetta, claimed I manipulated neighbors, claimed I abused my judicial position, claimed the audit itself was fabricated. Then she filed another ethics complaint against me just for good measure. Honestly, part of me almost respected the delusion. It takes real confidence to scream conspiracy while your own forged signatures are sitting inside forensic reports. But underneath all that rage, she was cracking. Everybody could see it. About a week later, there was a knock at my condo door around 9:30 at night. I checked the peephole and nearly laughed out loud. Vanessa. No makeup. Hair a mess. Oversized hoodie. Looked like somebody who hadn't slept in days. I should have closed the door immediately. Instead, I stepped into the hallway and kept the chain lock hooked. And yes, before anybody asks, I was recording the conversation. Single-party consent state. Perfectly legal. Vanessa stared at me for a second before speaking. We need to fix this, she said quietly. Not hello. Not I'm sorry. Just straight into damage control mode. There is no we here, I told her. She ignored that completely. Started rambling about settlements and misunderstandings and how her sister could repay some of the missing money if everybody would just stop pushing criminal charges. Then finally she said the sentence that changed everything. The fire was never supposed to get that bad. Silence. Just dead silence in that hallway. I remember hearing an ice machine humming somewhere downstairs while my brain caught up with what she'd just admitted. Excuse me, I said. Her eyes widened instantly, like she realized she'd stepped off a cliff mid-sentence. I just mean, I only wanted to scare you, she whispered. There it was. Raw, unfiltered, honest for the first time in her life. I kept my voice calm because courtroom instincts kicked in automatically. You tried to scare me, I repeated carefully. By setting my house on fire? Vanessa started crying then. Real crying too, not manipulative tears. The kind that come from somebody finally realizing consequences are real and unstoppable. You ruined my life first, she snapped suddenly. And there it was again, the victim complex underneath everything. People like Vanessa genuinely believe accountability is persecution. I looked at her for a long moment and said the only thing that came to mind. You burned down a dead woman's dream because you couldn't stand losing control of a neighborhood HOA. She slapped the wall beside my door hard enough to make me flinch. You think you're better than everybody, she screamed. That judge robe doesn't make you God. No, I said quietly. It just means I've spent 15 years watching people destroy themselves one selfish decision at a time. She left after that, stormed down the hallway crying and cursing loud enough for half the building to hear. I went back inside, locked the door, copied the recording onto 3 separate hard drives, then emailed Detective Ortega before I could second-guess myself. Vanessa Holloway was arrested the next morning at her real estate office. Arson, fraud, evidence tampering, theft, attempted bribery. The local news stations had helicopters circling by lunchtime. Juniper Ridge turned into statewide entertainment for about 48 hours. And somehow, the weirdest part still hadn't happened yet. Because 3 days after her arrest, Vanessa still had an active traffic case scheduled in my courtroom from months earlier. Reckless driving. 92 in a 55 near a school zone. I actually offered to recuse myself when I saw the docket. Ethics and appearances matter in my line of work. But the supervising judge reviewed everything and said something that surprised me. If you can remain impartial, he told me, then do your job. So I did. Courtroom 4B was packed that morning. Reporters, neighbors, curious attorneys pretending they had business nearby. Vanessa walked in wearing a gray pantsuit and stopped dead when she saw me on the bench. I mean, physically froze. The bailiff literally had to tell her twice to approach the defense table. I kept my tone professional the entire time. No speeches. No dramatic movie nonsense. The prosecution played dashcam footage showing her flying through the school zone while flipping off the officer during the stop. Open and shut case. Guilty. Standard penalties. Fine. Community service. Driving course. That should have been the end of it. But as I finished reading the sentence, Vanessa suddenly laughed this ugly, broken little laugh and said, "This whole town wanted me gone the second I stopped letting people do whatever they wanted." I remember the courtroom getting very quiet after that. And honestly, that sentence stayed with me longer than the confession did. Because here's the uncomfortable truth nobody likes talking about. Communities create people like Vanessa all the time. They hand small, insecure people tiny scraps of power, then act shocked when those people start using fear to feel important. What she did was evil, no question. But Juniper Ridge tolerated her behavior for years before anybody pushed back, because deep down most people would rather live beside corruption than deal with conflict. Vanessa eventually took a plea deal. Prison time, financial restitution, permanent loss of her real estate license. Her husband divorced her before sentencing. Last I heard, she moved 2 states away after release and changed her last name. As for the house, I rebuilt it. Took almost a year. And 6 months after completion, the first family moved in. A single mother recovering from leukemia, with 2 little girls who spent their first night there running through the hallway laughing like they'd just entered Disneyland. Sometimes I sit on that front porch at sunset listening to those kids playing in the yard, and I think about Evelyn. About grief. About anger. About justice. And honestly, I still don't fully know whether I handled everything the right way. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I should have walked away earlier. Maybe none of it ever had to escalate that far. But I do know one thing for certain. The second good people stop confronting toxic people just to keep the peace, toxic people start believing they own the world. So now I want to ask you something. If somebody like Vanessa lived in your neighborhood, would you have fought back? Or would you have stayed quiet and hoped somebody else handled it? Let me know in the comments, because trust me, after this whole mess, I learned people have very different definitions of justice.